permitting process that's needs to be taken care of first. The federal government has just announced recently that there are certain lease blocks where it's going to be giving leases to these developers to build the offshore wind turbines. And before they decided on where they were going to site them, they had a lot of stakeholder discussions, including with the military, trying to make sure that we're siting them in a way that's not going to be disruptive to radar and other military operations, for instance. And again, that will be re-looked at, re-examined during the permitting process to make sure that there is no disruption.
This is just processing question. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Google was going to be funding this, but then, and I'm not sure what the costs were for the state. So
there are two different parts of the project essentially. So there's the transmission backbone that will go along the Mid-Atlantic Bight to connect all of the various wind farms. That's what Google's investing in. They're going to invest $5 billion to make that happen. This particular project is essentially a separate project from that. It's just building the generating facility. Yes.
We signed up for Clean Currents through your organization a few years ago, and that's wind power, so I'm wondering where that's coming from.
Oh, well, so the way that Clean Currents works is they essentially, when you buy wind power from them, you're essentially buying renewable energy credits that they purchase from wind farms out in, for instance, Texas. Yeah.
So it's essentially offset.
Yeah.
You said that there's a cap of $2. What is the cap? $2 per month per household?
Exactly. That's as high as it would go.
Okay. And wouldn't the cap vary? The usage vary depending on your, like some electric homes.
Right. So this is per household. This is for the average, ratepayer. And I mentioned that it was also a cap that's essentially 2%, no more than a 2% rise in your monthly bill for every class of ratepayer from the biggest manufacturer. And there's also a cutoff point. So for instance, the steelworkers in Sparrow Point, they use millions of megawatt hours per year. Is that the right terminology? And past a certain amount of consumption, they actually have a cutoff that doesn't apply to them. This surcharge doesn't apply.
Does that include the costs of, like, they're going to amortize the costs of putting up these wind farms and stick it in your bill, and that will be no more than $2?
Yeah, so what happens, there's a couple other factors that we have to consider here. So first of all, this range, 92 cents to $2, this is looking at where fossil fuel price is going to be, right? So if fossil fuel prices remain low, if they remain kind of stable at where they're at right now for the next 5 years before this energy comes online, then you're going to see it at the upper end of that. You're going to see it at $2. If they continue to go up, which I mean, come on, they're fossil fuels, they're going to continue to go up. We will see it at the lower end of that range, around 92 cents. And over time, it'll keep getting lower and lower and lower as fossil fuels continue to rise. So eventually, we're going to come out ahead as a result of this. And then another factor is that when it comes to any additional costs, so when the proposal is put together and it's presented to the Public Service Commission, and a contract is entered into for a set rate per kilowatt hour that's going to be paid to the developers, if they have any additional cost overruns on the project that they didn't figure into that original proposal, if there's operating and maintenance costs beyond that, those cannot be passed on. That they have to bear the burden of that. So they are taking on considerable risk with this.
They being who?
They being, there's 8 companies that have put forward, responded to a request for information that the O'Malley administration put out this past year. So there's companies, for instance, like Blue Water Wind, which is the company that's going to be developing the Delaware project. There's 1 or 2 European companies in there, but the rest of them are American companies. Yes?
How do wind energy costs compare to solar energy costs at this point? What kind of comparison is it?
Offshore wind energy, I'm not 100% sure where it ranks. I know that solar is second most expensive next to nuclear right now, as far as I've heard. I just read an article recently. Hugh, do you have any more?
Yeah, it depends on the type of solar. Solar photovoltaic is pretty expensive, but that's typically being used in smaller quantities, home rooftops or building rooftop type things. And frankly, Maryland is not suitable for any other type, but the large scale solar programs that are being installed in the Southwest, the solar thermal programs, they're considerably less expensive because they're large, the economy of scale. And of course, you also have the difference between onshore and offshore wind. So those two things are considerably different in cost too. The other thing that doesn't show up in any of these figures is the so-called externalities of most fossil fuel things. The pollution damage, the environmental damage of the mining or the drilling of the material, that never shows up in the price of the resource. That's all absorbed by all of us in our taxes. And so until we can figure out a way to effectively isolate those costs, we can never really know the comparative values.
And I mean, just to give you a sense of some of those externalities, there was just a study done by the Physicians for Social Responsibility, excuse me, and they were looking at the environmental and health costs that are passed on to the public every year from our coal plants. And they found that there was a staggering $345 billion a year passed on in environmental damage and healthcare costs to the public. So if those were figured into the price of, fossil fuels, we would see offshore wind would be far more competitive than it is today. They would probably be far more expensive and prohibitive in cost. Yes?
Dr. Haskell, the economics of creating any kind of power generation, how was it paid for in the past? I mean, this we're sort of guaranteeing to the developer that their power will be purchased. How did we build Conowinga Dam? How did we build Calvert Cliffs? I mean, I don't, even my memory, and I certainly don't understand the economics of that.
The dams, I think, were almost all built by the government.
By the government, Conowinga was.
Some of them aren't, I'm sure.
Yeah, those are built under regulation, where the utilities will guarantee the return on their investment before we deregulate.
And so they knew from the beginning.
Yes.
That was the economics. Thank you. That helps. So this is the first time we've done this. Build a new power source after deregulation.
No.
Well, in Maryland it is. We haven't had anything since '99 or the late '90s. A new power source built in Maryland.
Constellation has been formed.
Right, yeah.
The information.
With regard to some of the construction, I remember I grew up in California, and it was routinely done at the time, and I think it probably still is to some extent. When a new power plant was being built, you were charged for it while it was called construction work in progress. And so therefore, by the time the plant was built, it was already paid for. But it was paid for by the consumers who weren't getting any benefit from it while it was under construction. If anybody moved, that was money down the drain from their perspective.
Yeah, just a couple points, I think, of clarification, at least in my understanding. That $2 cap that was proposed, it's my understanding that was for the first year only.
Right, now, so that was what was proposed last week. Since then, they've had discussions about making sure that they could extend it over the 25.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that
the political game's always changing.
On the cost side, the numbers you quoted, it's my understanding those came from the Maryland Energy
There's the higher range of the original figures that were proposed was around 870 per month. Now that was not from a comparable project. We have to talk about looking at comparable projects. It was taken from a project that doesn't have the economy of scale that these larger projects do, which was the Rhode Island, I think it's called Block Island project that's being built up there, and that's only on the scale of like 28 megawatts, so it just doesn't have the economy of scale. That's why the Public Service Commission revised its numbers to meet the MEA's numbers.
And the last thing I wanted to mention is the cost on that transmission line. Whether or not we wind up building offshore wind, Maryland ratepayers may get stuck with, a portion of the cost for that line, whether or not we're getting wind power. Because that's going to be a federal transmission line, then it's not clear how the costs for that are going to be allocated among PJM customers. So whether or not we wind up building wind turbines, a portion of the cost of that may still wind up flowing to Maryland customers.
Well, I mean, I don't claim to be an expert on the cost of the transmission, the Mid-Atlantic transmission backbone, but what I can say is that this project, as I said before, is a completely separate thing, and that is something that we have to look at down the road. But for now, we're just looking at the cost of this particular project.
That's what I'm saying. It is a completely separate thing, and it might not even be appropriate to factor those costs into the cost of the wind power if we're going to get stuck with those costs regardless. Is all I'm saying.
Well, some of us in this room heard a presentation a couple of years ago in Columbia on energy, where the head of MEA spoke, and he said what's been repeated in the newspaper since, that Maryland is going to need more energy. And that is, we either have to conserve electricity or we have to find new sources because of projected increases in growth. So that it would seem that we would need transmission lines no matter what from someplace, because we'll need new sources of energy and we'll need transmission lines to those sources. The other thing is the increase in cost of electricity since deregulation. Hasn't that been about $500 per household? I mean, huge amount.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I just know in the last decade, I mean, our rates have nearly doubled. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. So if our rates have doubled in the last decade, the thought that if we don't go this route, that they would be held constant.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that those there's no certainty with those prices. There's no certainty at all. And with even if we're not certain where along the 92 cents to $2 range those prices are actually going to fall, we know that it will be within that range or even possibly lower over the course of this of the 25-year contract. This offers us price stability. We don't have to guess at where the wind prices are going to go. We know where they're going to be. Over a 25-year period, no other energy resource can offer us that kind of certainty right now. There's nothing else out there that can do that, especially not fossil fuels.
Can we take maybe one more question because we're well past our time? Sydney?
I just wanted to clarify, you were saying in the past where you grew up, you paid for it before it was built. My understanding of this is that ratepayers won't see anything on their bill until the turbines are built and actually.
In 2016.
2016.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thanks.
Okay, well, again, Keith, your PowerPoint would be, Carol Connors has a question.
Yeah, Keith, do you want to explain to the group here the bill at the request of the governor, where it is?
So where it's at in the process?
What the situation is right now, what it contains, and so on. And that, of course, that we're all these groups, I assume, have been testifying for it.
Mm-hmm.
And is it going to happen? Is it going to pass, and so on? You want to explain some of that? I'd appreciate it.
The situation changes from day to day. There was a lot of, a lot of media coverage last week before the governor's press conference, and they were already writing the bill's obituary. And then the governor had his press conference. The main issue here, as we said, has been overpriced, and he submitted this amendment to put a cap at $2, and so where we're at as far as the committees that are looking at it, we have the Finance Committee in the Senate, and we have the Economic Matters Committee in the House, we know that Senator Middleton was one of the legislators that was concerned about price, and when the O'Malley administration offered the amendment, he said that helped with some of his heartburn. So we're pretty sure that we can lock in all the votes on the Senate side. As far as the House side goes, they've been kind of taking it on first. There was just a working group that was looking at some of these new amendments that have been offered today. As far as who's on the fence and who's not, that's changing from day to day. But we're slowly locking in the votes that we need, and when we're pretty close, we're confident that in the next couple of days we're going to get those votes locked in, and then we're going to see this thing pass. It's a huge priority for the administration, and I just personally can't see these Democratic committees dealing a blow to the governor on that scale. They want to work with him, they want to get it done, and the administration has shown O'Malley's been meeting with all these delegates and senators personally to hear out their concerns and make sure that they're being addressed, and we're pretty confident that we can win. So it's been a tough push. I mean, nobody said this was going to be easy, and we've had some pretty formidable opponents, but pretty sure we're going to see the finish line soon.
Well, and seeing the finish line tonight also. So thank you all for coming. And,